1854 narrative poem by Alfred, Lord Tennyson about the charge of the Light Brigade at the Battle of Balaclava during the Crimean War. He wrote the original version on the 2nd of December 1854, and it was published on the 9th of December 1854 in the Examiner. He was the poet laureate of the United Kingdom at the time. The poem was subsequently revised and expanded for inclusion in More Than Other Poems 1855. Alfred Tennyson, 1st Baron Tennyson FRS, the 6th of August 1809 to the 6th of October 1892, was an English poet. He was the poet laureate during much of Queen Victoria's reign. In 1829, Tennyson was awarded the Chancellor's Gold Medal at Cambridge for one of his first pieces, Timbuktu. He published his first solo collection of poems, chiefly lyrical, in 1830. Clarabelle and Mariana, which remain some of Tennyson's most celebrated poems, were included in this volume. Although described by some critics as overly sentimental, his verse soon proved popular and brought Tennyson to the attention of well-known writers of the day, including Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Tennyson's early poetry, with its medievalism and powerful visual imagery, was a major influence on the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. During 1854, when the United Kingdom was engaged in the Crimean War, Tennyson wrote several patriotic poems under various pseudonyms. Scholars speculate that Tennyson created his pen names because these verses used a traditional structure Tennyson employed in his earlier career but suppressed during the 1840s, worrying that poems like The Charge of the Light Brigade, which he initially signed only A.T., might prove not to be decorous for a poet laureate. The poem was written after the Light Cavalry Brigade suffered great casualties in the Battle of Balaclava. Tennyson wrote the poem based on two articles published in the Times. The first, published on 13 November 1854, contained the sentence, "The British soldier will do his duty, even to certain death, and is not paralyzed by the feeling that he is the victim of some hideous blunder," the last three words of which provided the inspiration for his phrase, "Someone had blundered." The poem was written in a few minutes on the 2nd of December of the same year. Based on a recollection of the Times's account, Tennyson wrote other similar poems, like Rifleman Form, in a very similar manner. The Charge of the Light Brigade. Summary. 1. The 600 cavalrymen rode for 1.5 miles into the Valley of Death. Light Brigade, advance. Charge for the artillery, their commander said. So the 600 cavalrymen charged into the Valley of Death. 2. Light Brigade advance, the commander said. Was any soldier discouraged or afraid? No, even though they all knew the charge was a mistake. It wasn't up to them to dispute their orders or to ask why they were given. Their job was simply to act and to die. So the 600 members of the cavalry charged into the Valley of Death. 3. There were cannons on their right, cannons on their left, cannons in front, and they all fired loud blasts. The soldiers were showered with gunshots and artillery shells, but they rode boldly and well into the teeth of death. The 600 soldiers rode into hell itself. 4. They raised their swords in the air and their swords flashed in the light. They stabbed the enemy soldiers firing the guns. They charged an entire army, and the whole world watched in amazement and consternation. The cavalrymen dove into the smoke from the guns. They broke through the enemy line. The Russian troops were dazed, cut into pieces, by their swords. Then the cavalrymen rode back, but not all 600 of them. 5. There were cannons on their right, cannons on their left, cannons behind them, all of them firing loud blasts. They were showered with gunshots and artillery shells, and many of these heroes and their horses were killed, even though they had fought so well, even though they had ridden into the teeth of death and come back from hell itself. That was all that was left of the 600 riders who set out on the charge. 6. When will their bravery be forgotten? The whole world admired their wild charge. We must respect their charge. And we must respect them, the brave 600 men of the Light Brigade. The Charge of the Light Brigade celebrates an act of bravery and sacrifice, a suicidal cavalry charge during the Crimean War. Written just 6 weeks later, Tennyson's poem argues that the willingness of the cavalry to sacrifice themselves, without calling their orders into question, makes them heroes. The poem thus suggests that heroism isn't just about bravery but also about duty, being willing to obey orders no matter the cost. As the speaker makes clear, the cavalry's charge is doomed from the start. They are surrounded by enemy guns, with cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them. Everywhere the cavalry looks they are stormed at with shot and shell. Against these guns, they have only sabers bare. In other words, they just have swords, hardly as powerful or intimidating as the big artillery they're going up against. What's more, in order to capture the guns, the soldiers have to ride all the way up to them, a distance of half a league, about a mile and a half. This means they have to ride a long way under artillery fire before they can even engage their enemy. The attack is thus desperate and foolish, and the speaker fittingly describes it with horror. It is, the speaker says, like riding into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell. In other words, the charge is suicidal. The speaker suggests that the cavalry knows that their charge is doomed before they even start, but they do it anyway. The speaker notes the soldier knew someone had blundered. In other words, the order to charge is a mistake, a lapse in judgment, and the soldier knows this, even if his commander doesn't. One might expect the cavalry to object to the order, since it is a blunder, which will get them all killed. But the speaker notes, none of the soldiers are frightened or discouraged. Instead, the speaker stresses that the cavalrymen respect their place with military hierarchy. It's not their job to come up with orders, but to execute them. There's not to make reply, there's not to reason why, there's but to do and die. As the poem celebrates this doomed cavalry charge, and the hero who did it, it is thus celebrating two different things at once. On the one hand, the speaker praises the bravery of the cavalrymen, their willingness to ride into a terrifying and horrifying battle. On the other, the speaker celebrates their obedience and commitment to military hierarchy, their willingness to execute an order even if they know it's a blunder. In this way, the poem suggests that heroism consists of both bravery and adherence to duty at once. And it subtly suggests that the blame for this military disaster does not lie with the cavalrymen themselves, they were exemplary soldiers. Instead, the blame rests with the commanders who sent them on a suicidal mission. Though Tennyson himself supported the Crimean War, the poem might encourage readers to question the military leaders responsible for such a waste of life. But whether the reader leaves the poem in favor of the war or against it, the poem is more concerned with praising the soldiers themselves, celebrating their sacrifice, their bravery, and their commitment to their country.